"You're never here anyway," she said, not even looking up from her coffee as I walked through the kitchen door, still wearing my safety vest and steel-toed boots. It was 7:15 on a Saturday morning, and I'd just finished my third consecutive 16-hour shift at the regional cold storage facility. My name is Mark Donnelly. I'm 48 years old, and I've been a shift operations manager in Toledo, Ohio for the past 24 years. I'd been working in logistics and warehouse operations since I was 24, right out of community college, building my way up from loading dock supervisor to running the entire night operation for Midwest Cold Storage. Laura was sitting there in her weekend clothes, hair still messy from sleep, stirring her coffee like she was preparing for something. The divorce papers were already on the table next to the sugar bowl. I just stood there for a moment, taking it in. The kitchen we'd painted together 8 years ago when we refinanced to help pay for Emma's college tuition. The table where we'd shared 18 years of Saturday morning conversations, planning our daughter's future, talking through every major decision we'd ever made as a family. Laura had been a high school English teacher for 22 years, the kind who actually cared about her students, who stayed late to help kids who were struggling. We'd met in college, both of us working part-time jobs to pay our way through, both understanding what it meant to build something slowly, carefully, with your own hands. The papers were official, typed on legal letterhead, already filled out with my information. She'd gone to a lawyer without telling me, filed everything without a conversation. After 18 years of marriage, I was being dismissed like a problem student who couldn't keep up with the curriculum. I picked up the documents and read through them quickly. Standard dissolution, citing irreconcilable differences, requesting equal division of assets. She was asking for half of everything we'd built together, including the house we'd put in my name 5 years earlier when she'd had a debt scare with some credit cards she'd hidden from me. "Understood," I said, and I meant it. I understood that the woman I'd married, the one who used to wait up for me after late shifts, just so we could talk for 20 minutes before bed, had decided that my working 16-hour days to secure a promotion that would give us better health care and a performance bonus large enough to finish paying for Emma's education wasn't worth her patience anymore. I understood that while I'd been redesigning the entire logistics protocol for the facility's new automated system, working nights and weekends to make sure the transition would be seamless, she'd been making her own plans for a transition I knew nothing about. What she didn't understand, what she'd never bothered to learn in all our years together, was exactly what I did during those long nights at the facility. To Laura, I was just gone, working some warehouse job that kept me away from home. She saw the uniform, the steel-toed boots, the safety equipment, and assumed I was just another blue-collar guy putting in overtime. What she didn't see was that I had become the most critical person in the entire regional operation. Not because I was irreplaceable as a person, but because I was the only one who understood the intricate systems that kept $40 million worth of temperature-controlled inventory from spoiling. Over the past 6 months, while she'd been growing distant and resentful, I'd been working with corporate engineers to design and implement a complete overhaul of our facility's logistics software. The old system had been patched together over 15 years, a mess of different programs and manual workarounds that somehow kept functioning but required constant supervision. The new system was elegant, automated, and completely dependent on protocols that I had written and documented in my own shorthand. I wasn't just running shifts anymore. I was the architect of the entire operations future. Charles Morrison, our regional VP, had been quietly grooming me for advancement for the past 2 years, not with fanfare or announcements, just with increased responsibility and trust. When the corporate restructuring began last fall, Charles had made sure my name was at the top of the list for the new senior operations manager position. The promotion came with a 40% salary increase, expanded healthcare that would cover Emma's remaining college costs, and a performance bonus that would pay off our mortgage within 3 years. The paperwork had been finalized the week before, pending the successful implementation of the new logistics system, which was scheduled to go live in 10 days. I signed the divorce papers that Saturday morning, without argument, without negotiation, without asking for anything except the clothes in my closet and my tools in the garage. Laura seemed surprised by how easily I agreed to everything. I think she'd been prepared for a fight, maybe even hoping for one. Instead, I folded the papers neatly, handed them back to her, and told her I'd be out of the house by Monday. She nodded, looking almost disappointed that there wasn't going to be drama, and went back to her coffee. That afternoon, I drove to a modest apartment complex near the facility and put down first month's rent on a one-bedroom unit. It wasn't much to look at, but it was clean, quiet, and exactly 7 minutes from work. I could walk there if I needed to. I spent Sunday packing my personal belongings into boxes, keeping only what I actually needed. 18 years of shared possessions suddenly seemed like someone else's life. The books we'd collected together, the furniture we'd chosen, the wedding gifts we'd never used. All of it belonged to a version of myself that apparently no longer existed. Emma called that Sunday evening from her dorm room at Ohio State. She'd been planning to come home for the weekend, but Laura had told her not to bother, said we were having some grown-up conversations that didn't need an audience. I didn't tell Emma about the divorce papers. That wasn't a conversation for a phone call, and it wasn't my story to tell first. I just asked her about her classes, listened to her talk about her roommate's boyfriend drama, and told her I loved her. After we hung up, I sat in my half-empty bedroom and realized that Emma was the only part of this life I was going to miss. Monday morning, I moved into my apartment and reported to work like nothing had changed. The night shift was already deep into the final preparations for the new system launch. My team of 12 operators had been training on the updated protocols for weeks, but they were nervous about the transition. These were good people, most of them with families, all of them depending on this facility staying operational and profitable. If the new system failed, corporate would look for someone to blame, and that someone would probably be me. The beautiful thing about technical work is that it doesn't care about your personal problems. The logistics software didn't know that my wife had filed for divorce. The temperature control systems didn't care that I was sleeping on an air mattress in an empty apartment. The inventory management protocols I'd spent 6 months perfecting were going to work or fail, based entirely on the quality of the thinking that had gone into them, and I'd put everything I had into getting them right. Laura called me Tuesday night while I was at work, going through the final system checks. She wanted to talk about the timeline for selling the house, dividing our retirement accounts, figuring out custody arrangements for Emma, even though Emma was 20 years old and could make her own decisions about where to spend her time. I told Laura that my lawyer would be in touch with her lawyer and that I didn't think we needed to discuss the details directly. She seemed frustrated by how businesslike I was being about everything. She'd expected emotion, arguments, maybe even begging. Instead, she got the same calm professionalism I brought to managing a 24-hour operation with millions of dollars in inventory. What Laura didn't know, what she'd never thought to ask about, was that the house we'd been living in for 8 years was titled entirely in my name. When she'd gotten into credit card debt 5 years earlier, hiding purchases and payments from me until the situation became critical, our financial advisor had suggested protecting our primary asset by removing her name from the deed. It was her idea, actually. She'd been embarrassed by her spending, guilty about the debt, and insisted that the house should be protected from any future financial mistakes she might make. We'd both signed the paperwork, both understood the implications, and then both forgotten about it as we moved on with our lives, and her spending habits improved. The new system went live Thursday night at 11 p.m. I'd been at the facility since 6 a.m., double-checking every connection, every protocol, every backup procedure. My team was ready, corporate was watching, and Charles Morrison was personally overseeing the transition from the regional office. At 11:01, the first automated inventory scan completed successfully. At 11:15, the first optimized routing protocol directed a forklift to the most efficient storage location without human input. By midnight, the system was running smoother than anything we'd ever operated. Charles called me into his office Friday morning with a smile I'd never seen from him before. "Mark," he said, shaking my hand like we'd just closed a major business deal. That was flawless. Absolutely flawless. Corporate is calling it the cleanest system transition they've seen in 15 years. The promotion paperwork went through this morning, effective immediately, and your performance bonus is being processed today. Welcome to senior management. The bonus was larger than my previous annual salary. The promotion put me on track for regional leadership within 5 years. The healthcare expansion meant Emma could stay on our plan through graduate school if she wanted to pursue her master's degree. Everything I'd been working toward, everything I'd sacrificed evenings and weekends for, everything Laura had resented me for pursuing, had just become reality. I didn't call Laura to tell her about the promotion. I didn't see the point. She'd made it clear that my work wasn't something she wanted to hear about, that my career advancement wasn't worth the time it took away from being present at home. Instead, I called Emma and asked if she wanted to have dinner Saturday night to celebrate some good news. She said yes immediately, happy to hear excitement in my voice for the first time in months. Emma and I met at a quiet restaurant downtown, the kind of place where you can have a real conversation without shouting over music or television screens. I told her about the promotion, about the bonus, about what it meant for her education and our future. She was genuinely proud, asking technical questions about the system I designed, understanding in a way that Laura never had that what I did required actual skill and expertise. Then I told her about the divorce. She wasn't surprised. She said she'd noticed the tension during her last few visits home, the way Laura and I seemed to be living parallel lives instead of sharing one. What did surprise her was how calmly I was handling everything, how focused I seemed on moving forward instead of dwelling on what had gone wrong. I told her that sometimes the best response to being undervalued is simply to prove your worth elsewhere, and let the results speak for themselves. Emma asked if she could see my new apartment. It was still pretty sparse. A card table for dining, an air mattress for sleeping, my work clothes hanging in an otherwise empty closet. But it was clean, organized, and peaceful, in a way our house hadn't been for months. Emma said it felt honest, like a place where someone actually lived instead of just stored their possessions. She asked if she could stay there sometimes when she came home from school instead of going to the house. I told her she was always welcome. 3 weeks after I'd signed the divorce papers, Laura called me at work, and for the first time since this whole situation began, she sounded panicked. "Mark," she said, "I need to talk to you about the house. There's been some kind of mistake with the mortgage paperwork. They're saying I'm not on the deed, that I don't have authority to make decisions about the property. Can you call them and straighten this out?" "There's no mistake," I told her. "The house has been in my name since we refinanced 5 years ago, remember? It was your suggestion after the credit card situation." "Oh," she said, and I could hear her processing the implications. "So what does that mean for the divorce settlement?" "It means the house isn't a marital asset subject to division," I explained. "It's my separate property. Your lawyer should have checked the deed before filing the paperwork." There was a long silence on the phone. I could hear her breathing, thinking, probably realizing that her assumptions about our financial situation had been completely wrong. The car situation became clear the following week. Laura had been driving a vehicle that was financed under my name and insured through my employer's group plan. When I updated my insurance to reflect my change in address and marital status, I removed her as an authorized driver. The insurance company sent her a letter explaining that she was no longer covered under the policy and would need to obtain her own insurance to continue driving the vehicle. Laura called me about the insurance letter, confused and angry. She'd assumed that the car was somehow jointly owned, that she had rights to continue using it regardless of our divorce. I explained that the vehicle loan was entirely my responsibility, had always been paid from my account, and that I couldn't legally maintain insurance coverage for someone I was no longer married to. She could take over the loan payments and get her own insurance, or she could return the vehicle. She chose to try to take over the payments, but the loan company required a credit check and income verification. Laura's teaching salary, which had always been supplementary to my income, wasn't sufficient to qualify for the remaining loan balance. Her credit, while better than it had been 5 years earlier, still showed the old debt problems that had caused us to restructure our finances in the first place. The loan company declined her application. Meanwhile, the divorce had created complications with her new living situation that I only heard about through Emma. Apparently, Laura had been seeing someone, a divorced father of 2 who worked in the school district's administration office. They'd been keeping the relationship quiet while Laura figured out her home situation. But after I moved out, he'd begun spending more time at the house. He'd been under the impression that Laura owned the property, that she was soon to be a woman of some financial independence with her own home and half of her ex-husband's assets. When the reality of Laura's situation became clear, no house, no car, no significant assets from the divorce settlement, his enthusiasm for the relationship cooled considerably. Emma told me he'd stopped returning Laura's calls, stopped coming around, essentially disappeared from her life as quickly as he'd entered it. Laura was suddenly facing not just the end of our marriage, but the end of the relationship she'd thought would replace it. 4 weeks after I'd signed the divorce papers, I was working a normal 8-hour shift, no more 16-hour marathons, no more weekend emergencies, when Charles Morrison stopped by my office. He had news from corporate. The success of our system implementation had impressed the executive team so much that they were expanding the program to all regional facilities. They wanted me to lead the rollout, which would mean travel, consultation fees, and a direct path to corporate leadership. I was reviewing the corporate offer when Emma called. "Dad," she said, "I think Mom's in trouble. She's been calling me crying, saying she can't afford the house payment, that her car got repossessed, that she doesn't know what she's going to do. She's asking if I can loan her money, if I can co-sign for an apartment lease." I told her I'm a college student with a part-time job at the campus bookstore. I don't have money to loan anyone. Emma asked if I thought she should help Laura find a smaller place to live, maybe something more affordable than the house. I told Emma that Laura was a capable adult who'd made her own decisions about how to handle our separation, and that those decisions had consequences that weren't Emma's responsibility to fix. If Laura needed help, she could ask for it directly instead of putting pressure on our daughter to solve problems that Laura had created. That weekend, Emma came to stay at my apartment instead of going to the house. She brought groceries and cooked dinner, something she'd never done at home, because Laura had always insisted on controlling the kitchen. We talked about her classes, her plans after graduation, her thoughts about the whole divorce situation. She said she was proud of how I'd handled everything, how I'd focused on building something positive instead of trying to tear down what Laura was attempting to build. She also told me that she'd driven by the house earlier that week and seen a "for rent" sign in the front yard. Laura had apparently moved out, unable to afford the mortgage payments on her teacher's salary, unable to qualify for a loan modification without my co-signature. The house where we'd raised Emma, where we'd hosted family holidays and birthday parties, where Laura had graded papers at the kitchen table for 15 years, was now empty. 6 months later, I was standing in the lobby of Midwest Cold Storage's new corporate headquarters in Columbus, reviewing architectural plans for facility expansions across 4 states. My role as Director of Regional Operations had evolved into something I'd never imagined when I was just trying to work enough overtime to pay for Emma's college tuition. The work was challenging, respected, and financially rewarding in ways that had nothing to do with overtime or sacrifice. Emma had decided to transfer to a university closer to Columbus so we could see each other more regularly. She was studying business logistics, inspired by seeing the technical complexity of what I did for work. She'd completely cut contact with Laura, not out of anger, but out of a simple loss of respect for someone who'd thrown away a good situation, because she couldn't appreciate what she had while she had it. Laura had eventually found a small apartment near the school where she taught, returned to working full-time without the option of early retirement we'd planned together, and was navigating life as a single woman in her late 40s. Emma had heard through mutual friends that Laura was struggling financially, socially, and emotionally with the reality of the choices she'd made. The man she'd thought would be her future had disappeared as soon as her divorce settlement turned out to be much smaller than anticipated. I never felt satisfied by Laura's difficulties, never took pleasure in her struggles. She wasn't evil, just short-sighted and impulsive in ways that had destroyed something that took 18 years to build. What I felt was something deeper than satisfaction. I felt validated. The work I'd been doing, the expertise I'd been developing, the sacrifice I'd been making for our family's future, all of it had been real, valuable, and worthy of respect. The promotion opportunity came with a house in Columbus, a suburb with good schools even though Emma was already grown, a neighborhood where successful people lived quiet, productive lives. I bought the house outright with the accumulated bonuses from the regional facility implementations. No mortgage payments, no financial stress, no anxiety about job security. It was smaller than the house Laura and I had shared, but it was entirely mine. Sometimes Emma would ask if I missed being married, if I regretted how everything had ended. I'd tell her that I missed some aspects of shared life, having someone to cook for, having someone interested in the details of my day, having a partner to make decisions with. But I didn't miss feeling unappreciated for doing work that mattered, or feeling guilty for pursuing opportunities that would benefit our family, or walking on eggshells around someone who resented my success. The last time I saw Laura was at Emma's college graduation. We were polite, cordial, focused entirely on celebrating our daughter's achievement. Laura looked older, tired in a way that seemed permanent rather than just the result of a busy day. She was there alone, driving a used car she'd bought with help from her parents, living in the small apartment that had become her permanent situation rather than a temporary transition. After the ceremony, Emma wanted to have dinner with both of us, trying to create some kind of family moment that acknowledged our shared history, without pretending that history could be recovered. We went to a restaurant near campus, made small talk about Emma's job prospects and graduate school options, carefully avoided any mention of the past year. When the check came, I paid without thinking about it. Laura thanked me quietly, and I realized it was the first time in months that someone had paid for her meal at a restaurant. She'd been living month to month on a teacher's salary, trying to rebuild a financial foundation at an age when she'd expected to be planning for retirement. Driving home that night, I thought about the morning when Laura had handed me the divorce papers and said I was never there anyway. She'd been right, in a narrow sense. I hadn't been physically present as much as either of us would have preferred. But presence isn't just about being in the same room. It's about being invested in shared goals, committed to building something together, willing to make sacrifices for outcomes that benefit everyone. I'd been present for our marriage in every way that mattered except the most superficial one. I'd been working to secure our future while Laura had been focused on the present moment's emotional satisfaction. When she'd decided that my physical absence was more important than my financial contribution, more significant than my professional development, more meaningful than my commitment to our family's long-term security, she'd chosen to end something real in favor of something that turned out to be imaginary. Now, 2 years later, I wake up in a house I own completely, go to work that challenges and rewards me fairly, and spend my free time with people who appreciate what I bring to their lives. Emma visits regularly, bringing friends from graduate school who are impressed by what I've accomplished in logistics and operations management. I've started dating occasionally, women who understand that professional success requires dedication and who respect rather than resent competence and ambition. Laura's life went in the opposite direction. She lost the house, the car, the financial security, and the relationship she'd thought would replace our marriage. She gained independence, which was what she'd said she wanted, but independence without the resources to enjoy it effectively. She'd traded a partnership with someone who was building toward success for the freedom to struggle alone. Sometimes I wonder if she understood, eventually, that the work I was doing during those 16-hour shifts wasn't just a job I was trying to escape from, but a career I was trying to advance through. That the time I spent away from home wasn't time stolen from our relationship, but time invested in our future. That when I came home tired from designing systems and managing people and solving complex problems, I wasn't avoiding her. I was accomplishing things that would benefit both of us. But understanding after the fact doesn't change the decisions that were already made. Laura chose to see my work as something that competed with our marriage, instead of something that supported it. She chose to interpret my professional dedication as personal neglect. She chose to end our partnership at exactly the moment when the years of preparation and sacrifice were about to pay off for both of us. The house we'd shared is occupied by renters now, a young family with small children who probably don't know that the previous owners had gotten divorced in the kitchen on a Saturday morning in October. Emma drives by sometimes when she's in Toledo visiting friends, and she says it looks like a happy place again, with toys in the yard and a garden that someone actually tends. I'm glad the house is being used by people who appreciate it. Laura and I had built something good there, raised a daughter who turned out remarkable, created a foundation that could have supported decades of shared life. The fact that Laura chose to walk away from that foundation doesn't diminish what it was or what it could have been. What I learned from the whole experience is that respect doesn't need to shout. It shows up. Every shift, every day. Every time someone needs you to solve a problem or handle a responsibility or be trusted with something important. The people who understand that kind of respect will value it. The people who don't understand it will take it for granted until it's not there anymore. Laura learned that lesson the hard way, after it was too late to apply the knowledge to our marriage. But Emma learned it by watching both of us navigate the consequences of our choices. She learned that success requires sacrifice, that building something worthwhile takes time and dedication, and that respecting someone's work means respecting the person doing the work. That's probably the most important thing I could have taught her, even though I never intended for our divorce to be a teaching moment. Emma saw what happens when you appreciate the people who show up for you, and what happens when you take them for granted instead. She saw the difference between someone who builds toward goals and someone who gives up when the work gets demanding. Now Emma is building her own career, her own relationships, her own understanding of what it means to be present for the people and responsibilities that matter. She approaches challenges with the same methodical patience I brought to redesigning logistics systems, the same long-term thinking that made my career advancement possible. And when she gets married someday, she'll understand that being there for someone isn't just about physical presence in the room. It's about showing up for the work, the planning, the sacrifice, and the delayed gratification that makes a shared life possible. She'll know the difference between a partner who's building something with you and a partner who's just along for the ride until something more appealing comes along. That's the real vindication, more meaningful than any professional success or financial security. Emma learned from our divorce that commitment means staying invested in outcomes, even when the process requires sacrifice. She learned that respect is earned through consistent demonstration of competence and dedication. She learned that the people worth building a life with are the people who understand and appreciate when you're working for shared goals instead of just personal satisfaction. Laura's story ended with her learning those lessons too late to save our marriage, but early enough to potentially apply them to whatever relationship she builds next. My story continues with the understanding that the work itself was always worthwhile, regardless of whether it was appreciated by the person I was doing it for. Respect doesn't need to shout. It shows up, every shift, every day. And the people who recognize that kind of dedication are the people worth showing up for.